All right, Ryan, I'm going to hand it over to you, sir. Go for it.
All right, check, check, check. How's everybody doing? All right, I know many of you are happy that finally someone other than James Knight is going to be up here for AMD. My name is Ryan Sagare. I'm with AMD, and I'm delighted today on stage we have Industry Light and Magic, otherwise known as ILM, a renowned visual effects company started by George Lucas back in 1975, part of a subsidiary of Lucasfilms, and now part of course, Disney. And one thing we're really happy about with ILM is they were an early adopter of AMD EPYC processors and AMD Threadripper Pro processors, which is kind of the engine behind what powers the amazing visual effects that they all are doing. They've got tons of awards, and I want to present to you, we have on stage with me, we have Talley, who is the virtual production supervisor. We have Chris Bannister, executive producer for virtual production, and of course Ian Milham, virtual production supervisor. And our panel today works specifically with virtual production. They've worked on films such as The Fabelmans, The Batman, The Mandalorian, Andor, The Midnight Sky, among others. So the portfolio is absolutely incredible. And I wanted to start this out because you're going to hear the term stagecraft a lot as we talk today. And so I thought we could start by just kind of talking about stagecraft and virtual production and kind of providing some context for the audience. So who wants to start it out?
Yeah, I can start with that. So Stagecraft is really Industrial Light and Magic's term for all of our virtual production services. That includes everything from motion capture, virtual camera, obviously the LED piece that we've worked at. We have a number of LED volumes around the world right now, but it really connects to ILM having a history with virtual production for a really long time, all the way back to AI and using first versions of simulcam. But really now we've had a great chance to, yes, the actual movie. But we've had a great chance to be able to expand those servicing and offerings into a lot of different areas and productions now. And Ian and Justin both have been virtual production supervisors on seasons of The Mandalorian, a number of features and things like that on our LED stages. And Ian currently also supervises at our motion capture stage in San Francisco.
Great. So let's start with how has ILM Stagecraft really revolutionized the work you all are doing in production at ILM?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is, for so long, visual effects have been a sort of a very siloed process, and our artists have had a chance sometimes to contribute in pre-production if a production is engaging with our art department, which is frequently the case with Lucasfilm, but other productions too, right, where it's a lot of the ideation. And then, of course, the meat of what we've done over all these decades has been in post-production, working on shots and developing sequences and delivering final pixels there. And the presence during production itself, while actually shooting, has been usually pretty modest. It's about data wrangling. It's about having a supervisor and a few people there so we have a good idea about what happened while shooting was done so we can later do good post work on it, but relatively little input or participation or chance to work. And actually, that goes both ways, where some of the people that were involved with the production, the DP or someone like that, they've moved on to another movie by the time that we're doing post work on it. And what's so great about virtual production is the crossover that's now happening between all three of those phases. Not only is a lot more presence required from ILM artists during production, but some of those same people now are a bigger part of prep, and some of the prep people are then staying on to be a part of shooting, and people that would normally only get involved in post are now getting involved during shooting. And as much as it strengthens everybody's work, because I think so often when people see a shot that isn't entirely successful in a movie or something like that, people are it is not necessarily like, oh, you just don't believe it. Even if the rendering is perfect, you just don't believe it, and that's usually due to some sort of miscommunication or the fact that the various aspects of the shot aren't working together, and maybe the people working on it haven't even met. And so, in addition to obviously the very exciting technological developments, I think what's really exciting is the chance for all these departments to work together again in kind of the way we all did in our backyard when we were making movies together. And it has a little more like, let's make a movie spirit, where we're all figuring out clever solutions in the moment and informing each other's work and making promises to each other about what'll happen later that leads to just better looking stuff. So it's a very exciting time.
And along those lines, now, the ability to have everybody kind of working together, does that elevate the creativity because you're able to kind of do more things throughout the process, like make mistakes, where you're not sending it to post-production? Could you guys just kind of talk about how that process has sort of evolved with Stagecraft?
Yeah, I think it allows a certain kind of risk-taking when you see the results of that risk being taken in the moment. It also helps conversations move forward very quickly. You can sort of iterate on a conversation very quickly. Where does that giant thing that I can't see exist? How big is it? How much does it tower over us? Something that actors that we worked with in the past have said is you're all, when you're looking at an X, like an orange X on the wall, you're all imagining whatever you're imagining that orange X looks like. And to your character might be very stern, but you've imagined something super horrifying. And so your reaction to it is totally different than the other person whose character is supposed to be relatively easily scared, but they didn't imagine something nearly as horrifying as what they imagined. Now we're sharing that experience in real time. The camera operators can see it. So you've got a ship that takes off. They can see it. They can follow it as it goes past. All of that has been really fantastic. I came into this world of virtual production just 2 years prior to the LED wall component of it, and we were really trying to accomplish that same goal of foster those conversations, make sure that people could see it. But there's something when it's on the wall and you're fighting for that shot to live or for it to be in the camera final or whatever it is. There's a level of engagement that is different. The stakeholder sort of engagement of like the camera operator, the dolly grip, the gaffer wants this shot to work, and they're all invested in the shot working. And so, I come from a very traditional film production background, and it feels like we're right back there again, where we're all HODs, we've got a job to do, we've got a shot to accomplish, and we're a part of that conversation, and we're helping to foster that communication across different departments who all have to imagine that thing that they couldn't see, and now we're a channel or a bridge to them seeing it.
Could you guys provide some specific examples from projects that you've worked on where you've sort of seen successful examples of utilizing the virtual production technique? You kind of touched on the spaceship example, but we'd love to hear a few more specific examples.
Yeah. Not too long ago, we did an episode of ABC original Hulu series Grownish. And that's a show that, it's not The Mandalorian, right? Like, this isn't their whole workflow, but they had a script, they had a story that they wanted to tell, where the scope of that story took them into a place where we became an answer, right? How do you do this? Because, for context, what they were going to do was a massive outdoor concert. And so in the time that they had to stand that up, the number of people that you have to get together, the acts on stage, the giant lighting rig, as written, there were multiple different stages that the characters were going between. And all of that is a logistical nightmare. And one of the things that was really cool is from the very first conversation that I was a part of anyway, we're all looking at the assets as they're being built, blocking in with the production designer and the DP, what time of day is this going to be? Where are they going to go? Where are these stages positioned in relationship to one another? How does it match the story beats? and all of that was it was really amazing to have a show that was in production, right? They're shooting. We're snatching these meetings with the DP at lunch, popping out to do the phone call and on his iPad look at the assets that we're working on. But to get into those conversations and yeah, I mean, it is very much the way that I feel like we would approach any other department within film production in a way that you're having conversations about what is the shot you're trying to get, what are your goals, what's the story you're trying to tell, what can we do to help you tell that story, how do we give you the control where you need it in the time that you have to make it happen. So how much control do you need over the live light show that's happening on the side stage versus the main stage? How much control do you want to have over the lights that are going overhead? How much integration do you want between the content driving lights on the stage or the practical lights driving the content? And we've been doing this enough now where I feel like you can get to the heart of those conversations faster and gauge where people's interest is and where the effort and the energy needs to be. And to answer your question, that was a show where those needed to be in camera finals. There was not a massive post rollout on this, and so that was the eye that we were taking to every frame was this has to live, and so helping them work on, let's pull those mocap cameras in the background so that they're not going to be a thing in your shot, and making sure that we were being good partners in making that a successful experience for them.
What I like about that example is that it's not a big sci-fi epic. It's not a kind of thing you would necessarily think that virtual production would be the kind of sort of marquee work that virtual production has done, and it's an outlier relatively in the kind of thing they're making a lot of episodes of that show in a season, and a lot of the resources they would normally have don't apply to the story they want to tell. So that episode's probably getting cut, or how are they going to make that otherwise? They need big elaborate set pieces. Actually shooting at a music festival is going to be difficult. It was also mostly set at night, so it would be how could you do that over multiple days? If you were, a real music festival is going to be over in 2 days, and so that it's just logistically a nightmare. And it wasn't about visually showing off. It was about keeping their vision intact. Or another example, we did a lot of work with Gareth Edwards on The Creator, coming out in September. Right.
Excited for that.
And
really
he specifically, right, he's his own camera operator. And he is a unique director in that he's so fluent in visual effects, and he comes from that background. But, right, that's a show that occasionally takes place on the ground in a very verite guerrilla way, and occasionally takes place in big epic settings, and yet he wants the visual style to stay consistent. So we didn't use a volume for a lot of it. There's a case where we used all the Stagecraft tools in very strategic ways, where sometimes he shot at our mocap stage, sometimes he shot on a volume, sometimes he shot, I think, with 6 people in a van, just stealing shots as he could. And later we would add, very specific, and we couldn't bring out a lot of rigging. We couldn't do a lot of stuff, but he added, specific things there. And I think that was a case of using virtual production, again, to support an aesthetic goal, which is I have a vision for my movies. I tend to operate my own camera. I don't want anything to look like it was born in a computer, even if it was mostly done in a computer. And we were able to use virtual production to give him the familiarity of operation, the tools that he's used to, the way that he would normally hold a camera and use it, and be in a world that had a lot of virtual elements and yet maintain the style that he wanted.
So how do you make sure you've got that seamless integration between those different environments, right? You're shooting on the LED volume wall, you're doing all these shots. How do you make that come together as the supervisor of this?
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, one thing I was going to say that, as we were talking about what is Stagecraft and talking about it as a broader term, one thing is we hand between a lot of different, we obviously have amazing tools we've written in-house. We have a lot of tools that are out on the market that we're using. And part of the making this vision come is about having the right people who can pick the right tools and the right things for the job to make it all we often talk with people when we're starting of saying, you know, it's our job to worry about the technological pieces, and we want you to speak the language that you want to speak. And similarly, we kind of approach each project being like, what's the right tool that we need to use in this case, and being really honest with people of, you know, when they don't need to use the tool because it's the cool new tool.
Which actually is kind of step one in what you were just asking, in terms of how do we make sure, because like everything we do has to be no joke, photo real. Like if it looks like you're inside a cartoon or if it doesn't play, like we've had a problem. So honestly, the first step is to go through the script, work with everybody, and identify things that we think we have a good shot at. Like we'll place some strategic bets and maybe take some risks, but we have now, I think we've done 5 full seasons of television plus, you know, I don't know, a lot of features and various other episodics. So we're into hundreds of shooting days of doing this, and we're still just learning ourselves, and it's still hard. And we've identified a few things that we think are going to be successful. So honestly, even something, I mean, there's probably no more poster show for virtual production in LED volumes than Mandalorian. And I was a supervisor on season 1 of that. Justin has subsequent seasons. And we still only do maybe half the show this way. If the quality of light is needed, or if it's a pretty straightforward way to go outside and shoot it, we go outside and shoot it. The whole thing doesn't happen in a warehouse in Manhattan Beach. It's just sort of, you know, certain aspects. And what we have gradually expanded on is then now what we're finding to achieve that sort of seamless blend is we're breaking free a little bit of the idea of the static volume. We still do that, but now we're breaking it up, we're deploying it more specifically, and we're changing our LED configuration more on an environment by environment basis, again to position it for success, because as much as possible, we're trying to use it as both a background and a light at the same time. From our perspective, given that for a lot of those shows, there is, although we are going for in-camera finals as much as possible, there is always a thing. It's actually easier to replace the background than it is to change the light that was on the practical set. So we actually, I think people in general overemphasize and chase the background and underappreciate the lighting contribution and the reflection contribution. So that's what we're keying on first. And there are aspects like you can't get around the physics of light. And so the inverse square of how it's falling off, how is that going to fit? What is the time of day? Can you accurately represent that? So first step is choosing a scene that we think gives us a good fighting chance. And then as much as possible from then on, honestly, it's just as much collaboration as possible. So I think what Richard Bluff, who was the supervisor on season 1, along with Greg Frazier, the DP on season 1, and the production designer, Andrew Jones, Greg has continued on now to do the Batman and Dune, and you know he was great then, and he continues to be great, and Andrew is amazing. Right? They spent like 2 months in a room basically having a fist fight over how are they going to do this, and what's going to work, and what are your visual goals, and I think as much as the actual choices.
Who won?
Well, that's the point, is I think nobody, and that was the best outcome that could be. That anytime one department does win, chances are the result is not going to be that great. And it's when it serves all 3 departments that you're going to turn out okay. And just as much as any plans that came out of that room, it was more the relationship and understanding of where they were each coming from and what their goals were for this process that led to any kind of success. So, I mean, yes, we could talk for a long time about how we do in-the-moment LiDAR scans. Like, the construction department doesn't always build exactly to the blueprints. We do in-the-moment LiDAR scans to be able to then solve and align the virtual world exactly to the set as they built it rather than as they planned to build it, and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of tricks and processes that we've learned, but by far the #1 indicator of whether we're going to pull this off in the moment is how much all the people, all the stakeholders talked beforehand.
Yeah, I was going to double down on that as well. Like, it's that conversation and collaboration, and then our teams as well are killer. You know, like the people that we work with, they care a great deal about what they do. They show up and I think put it out on the line every day. And so it's that part is wonderful, that that investment from our team and the investment of all the teams that we work with in the success of the thing that we're trying to do. Yeah, that is incredibly rewarding to come to that every day, and that sort of desire to exceed what you did the last time that you were in the volume. Yeah, put it all on the field.
And speaking of volume, you know, you're giving these great examples of Star. I think I was really most surprised to see when, as part of this, films like The Fabelmans included in there. Like, when I think of a film like The Fabelmans, I don't necessarily think of virtual production. Maybe you could just kind of touch on that. For me, I had no idea when I watched the film that anything of that was done in virtual production. Why was that the choice, and was that choice made because of efficiency purposes? Was it made because of cost? Is it going back to the lighting, what you were talking about?
I think they originally came to us because the visual effects supervisor on the project, Pablo Hillman, thought it was really the right choice for getting the lighting in there, for getting, especially for a moment that was super key on performance and being able to give them that moment. And honestly, it's one of those things where this isn't a team that's doing it because it's a cool technology. If anything, they'd like to move on with their day and but because of the nature of the scene that they were filming, it was going to be really challenging. But the moment where the light in one of the moments hits and the volume lights up and it's on the car and it's all of those things sold everybody in that moment. And so, and I think Justin was the supervisor on that one and can speak to just being able to respond to people and iterate on the tools and figure out things on the fly was really crucial.
Yeah, it was a great yes and experience of, we got it in, we put the content up on the wall, and we're playing back, the car's there, we've got a Hudson sprayer out, and we're spraying rain on the windshield, and the power line goes, it's in the content, the photograph content. Power line goes down, sparks shoot across the LED wall, and then it was, okay, that looks great, let's add SFX. And so SFX comes in with a spark gun and fires sparks across the windshield. Okay, that's great. Let's add a lighting cue to it. And so we worked with the lighting team to create, DMX integration. When that happened, when the sparks went, they had an array of lights that also went off, and they went in the same sequence as the sparks going. And then it was like, okay, let's also bring a piece of LED wall in a lot closer to push more of the light and have it seamless in reflections. And so we put that together, brought that in, pixel map, the same stuff you were talking about, integrate that into place. And then it, I got the joyful experience of standing at the monitor and watching it happen and hitting the button to make it happen. And there's nothing cooler than, got it, great, let's move. That was the whole day. It was, got it, great, moving on. The rain piece of it seems so simple, but it's amazing. When you have little droplets of rain and the camera's focused to where the rain is, and you're seeing in the refraction of the raindrop the sparks shooting by in the background and all that stuff, it's awesome.
So when you're planning these shots and looking into these shots and talking about virtual production, you kind of touched on this a little bit. I'm always thinking in terms of getting the shot, not necessarily how the actor is engaging with the shot. So how much of that plays into that production process of, this is going to get the feeling from the actor that they're able to actually sort of engage with this virtual production. So we want to do it here. We want to sort of manipulate the environment to get exactly what we want from the actor. Is that something that plays into the planning and production of this?
I mean, it certainly can do. Justin talked a little bit about what we've called sort of the imagination tax and how much actors are burning mental calories on imagining and putting themselves in an environment, and we hopefully get to free them from that. I think there's definitely, I mean, we've certainly had times where we've taken advantage of the dynamism of virtual production to, like, it's the smallest little thing, but we were doing some piloting sequences, and so often, I think, if you're normally doing playback for a piloting sequence or a driving sequence, right, it's almost imperceptible, but you can tell that the person who's theoretically flying or driving is reacting instead of driving. That the world goes like this, and they go, ah, and it's like a few frames late. So we actually took advantage of the data and the fact of it being the live world to give a little indicator, and actually gave some control to the actor so they could, you just see a little tension in their arm and a little bit of lean first, and then the world moved. And you're just like, I buy it. And, you know, so being able to provide that interactivity, we do, you know, I would say a lot of our advances over the past few years have not really had to do that much with like rendering quality or stuff like that, although we continue to work on that. It really has been as much as possible to break this plane and provide more interactivity and provide more things. Usually for filmmakers, most everything we've done has been for DPs, gaffers, and stuff to have their stuff talk to our stuff, and for it to work in a way that's more intuitive to them. But it also then sometimes crosses over into talent, where we have done live lighting. We have done talent-held lighting instruments that both literally shine on the world or shine into the world. We've done more than a couple scenes involving laser swords that are actual lighting instruments in the world, and then light up the virtual content depending on their tracked objects that can then light up and that kind of stuff. And I think even as a small matter, Ewan McGregor talked about on Obi-Wan that even though his commute was the same from his trailer to the volume, obviously he's going a lot of different places, but the fact that it was different when he showed up there was helpful. That it wasn't, oh, I'm going to my same room again, I'm going to the same stage again, but the fact that he would get there and it would be a new place was immediately sort of helpful for putting him in the right mood of what we're doing. So yeah, I think it's great.
I want to kind of change things up a little bit and go back to sort of the cost and efficiency piece of this. I know that recently at AMD, we just did one of our shoots for one of our new products. We were doing a commercial shoot for our new processors, the upcoming Starfield. I don't know if you guys have heard about the game coming out in September. And for us, what was really exciting about that was the amount of shots that we were able to get in a day, the variety of shots we were able to get in the day. So maybe you could kind of just talk about a time when you really were looking at this is going to make us more efficient and more costly. I know we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but maybe kind of expand on that.
Well, I think one of the things, as this technology was emerging, I think that's usually every producer's question after we tell them all about the wonders of the technology. They say, what's it gonna cost, or how's it gonna save me money? And I think the biggest thing we found is the key is just getting specific about what you're trying to do. And if the savings for the show are speed, we've had, we did the work on The Old Man, where they were going to the desert. They needed to do, vehicle stunts and things like that. But then they were able to come back into the stage and get pages and pages of dialogue, because we can stream really quickly off of disk, and to be able to move that quickly and get through that, and to work with, there it was the actors like to work in longer takes, and so they said, we need to be able to run for a very long time, and being able to gear the technology to what they're asking for and their process was really big. But I think, and Ian alluded to it, is figuring out what the other solution is, and then tailoring your technology solution to that. So, often when the technology first emerges, people say you can go to, the desert a million miles away and you don't have to travel your team. Well, sometimes we have producers who come and say, I was never going to let my team travel 1,000,000 miles anyways. That was never in the scope. And so then you really need to dig in and understand what are the things you're trying to solve, and then you can talk about things like efficiency and things like that. You might have productions who come and say, we shoot 15 pages all the time because we only have 2 days to make this commercial. But there's all of those wins. There's location costs, set build costs, there's logistical costs of holding locations and all of that, efficiency wins. But really, what I found is being able to dig in and say, this is the specific win for your production, that really makes sense for people.
Yeah, I remember on, so I was the soup on Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and it was the same executive producer on that who was the executive producer on Blood Diamond, 2006 movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. And he was looking, one day we were in the volume talking, and it was his first experience with it, and he's like, you know, it took so much money and time and effort to get us all to that mountaintop in Africa, and I don't know if I would do this instead of that, because I think it mattered that we really went. And I think that effort and that temperature and heat and all that kind of stuff, I think that's on screen and I think that's important. He goes, but I would not want to go back. And if you could do reshoots in here or pickups, now we're talking. So it's not necessarily an either or situation where it's like, oh, you could do your movie or your film with virtual production, or you could really go do the expensive thing. Sometimes it's like, well, strategically go when you need to go, get what you need to get, but maybe you don't have to go twice. Or in that Old Man example, what's great about that, so that was a car chase down a desert road, hard to get to, and they wanted to shoot long pages, and they could run out of road. You could only close so much, right? So they really went, they really brought cars, they really did the chase in the desert, but they got their exteriors, they got their key shots, they really did the stuff they needed to do out there, but they also captured the environment as it was in the moment when they did that shooting. And then they came to us with that environment, which we plussed up a little bit, added some dynamic cars, did some things, but it matched perfectly, and they could do a bunch more shots that were friendlier in a virtual production environment, and you didn't have to really be in the desert, and they shot like 16 pages in 2 days. And so they shrunk their whole production time, and they got all kinds of stuff done, and it worked seamlessly, and they did each for what each was good at. Are we doing Q&A yet?
Well, you got a question?
Yeah, quick question. How long between the time you shot the plates and were able to play that back on stage?
I don't know in that case how long it was, but we could typically do that in a week.
Yeah, it was a pretty quick turnaround, and there we were stitching the plates. But
Yeah, that's what takes all the time.
That's really where the time comes in. But we've also been able to come up with some really cool solutions that Justin and the team came up with, where someone came to us and said, I'm not getting my plates 1 week beforehand. I have 1 day. I'll give them to you the day before. And Justin and the team were like, all right, we'll come up with something, and came up with some really cool templates to be able to, and there were compromises in terms of where we hid things and things like that, but
But they got their shoot,
Yeah.
They gave us the plates, we got them up and shot a couple of spots in a day, so.
Yeah, I mean, one of our specialist answers would be, I mean, we try not to ever say no, but in that case it would be yes, but here's what that means. Yeah. So if you want it the next day, we don't have time to stitch it. If we're not going to shoot it and you're just going to give it to us, we don't have time to stitch it. Here's what that means. And in that case, you developed a really clever array where we were using all those plates on kind of like floating cards, and we were able per camera to kind of move it in and do whatever, maybe hide a scene behind an A-pillar, maybe move it for this shot, and we just had to be like, by the way, you're not going to be able, you can't orbit here because you're going to expose a scene. You can't do this. And that's what the cost is of having to go the next day. And they might go, yeah, okay, deal, and then it's good. Or, we sort of, so all these things are that type of thing.
yeah, we had one of our first shoots on our smaller stage was for How I Met Your Father, where they had a Brooklyn Bridge scene. They only had 2 weeks. And that's one of those things where if someone came to me and said, I need a fully photoreal Brooklyn Bridge, how much time and how much money is that going to cost? That's a pretty broad box to play in. But we knew we had 2 weeks, and we knew we had a target, and we were able to very quickly, we can use all of the highest end virtual scouting tools, and that becomes really important for some of our projects. But there, we worked with storyboards and conversations and they said, we want to do this. And we looked at it and said, okay, well, we can get this, this, and this. This one's going to be a problem. And we just talked through, okay, well, what's the solution or the workaround, or that's an easy give. And they were able to get a sequence that may have been lost because of the logistical challenges there.
Honestly, anytime we can work with photography, we just work with photography. There's nothing quicker and simpler, and if the shot or the desired setup doesn't need to have live parallax, or the camera move doesn't demand it or won't show off the fact that we're doing it in real-time 3D, why burn all those calories to do real-time 3D? You're going to make it look great by just going to a real place and taking a picture of it, or doing some slight augmentation or 2.5D stuff. Almost everything on Batman, except for a few specific items, even though that was all CG, we still mostly rendered it to 2D elements for the various aspects we did.
Yeah, and if anybody else has any questions, we're gonna you can ask them now, and I'll leave a little time at the end to actually ask a few questions. I do want to make sure I get to a couple questions. One of those being, what sort of training and skill set are you looking for with upcoming people that want to get into the field of stagecraft, virtual production?
Our teams are super diverse in terms of their background. I think anybody who's done this sort of knows this, but we interface with so many different departments that there's a myriad of skill sets that are applicable here. Also, I think you said it, Ian, like this is all still quite new. So the expectation that we're gonna find somebody with 6 years of experience doing LED volume work is like, I already know you, It's not a huge crowd. And so I think then it's sort of, the people with traditional filmmaking backgrounds. We've got boots on the ground. We have people who have a background as compositors, people who have a background working in game engines and traditional CG. And almost everybody has some like weird side hustle that is applicable, like they're into stop motion animation, or they build miniatures, or they love photography, and all of those passions. That's the thing I guess I was trying to say before, is that like there's nobody on the team who's not passionate about this. It's as Ian said, it's hard. So I think you're sort of looking for people who have a passion and a drive and a genuine interest. They're curious, because this is only one of two things. It's uncomfortably changing all the time, or you're a curious person who's excited and driven by that. But other than that, I think it's, if you lined up my whole team and said like, how did you get here? Everybody's story is pretty different.
Yeah, don't feel bad. Don't think there's not a place for you if you don't know how any of this works, because none of us knew how any of this worked pretty recently. And we're used to training people up, and we're all still learning together. We all probably do have some applicable deep experience that is a portion of this, but not much of it. I would say, to echo your point, the one aspect, and of course, virtual production can be a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean on stage LED volumes, but I would say you should enjoy the on-set environment and the what's great about that. And I remember in the session earlier talking about the culture clash and talking about the CG worlds and the production worlds and where they overlap and stuff. I mean, let's be clear. Our angle entirely is productions do not need to learn how this works to engage with it and reap benefits. And they're not changing how they do things in a broad set. So you should enjoy the process of learning how other people work, and like working with people who work with actual lights and how the physics of how actual lights behave, and learning how those work, and not trying to convince them that CG lights work better. and then learning and working it together. But it's really a learning environment, and it's not about someone coming with some incredible resume already.
I think that's an area where, on my own experience, but it's an area where ILM has carried that for a very long time. If you look at people who have gone from the transition from painting practical models and shooting them through computers and carried on through that, it's because there's a very particular culture of like a very open room. Like most of the rooms are pretty all-comers of like, if you have an idea, you should share it and try and come up with a solution, because we're gonna be in that space where it's complicated and hard and we don't know how to do this. And so I think we've found a lot in the Stagecraft teams. It's very much that too, and trying to encourage people to come with their ideas, and that's one of the wins. I know that Ian and Justin both, one of the things about running the Stagecraft teams is it's a lot of very brilliant people in that room, and engaging their teams and making sure that their teams are helping come up with the solutions is one of the great things.
Yeah, I think somebody said earlier something about being the smartest person in the room, and I am 100% aware that I am not the smartest person. And as you said, yeah, it's like when you gather together the most brilliant people at all these different things in one place, everybody does have an opinion about it, and that investment also means sometimes that we'll all get heated about the thing that we want to do, but it's all in service of the shot, right? It's all in service of the project and what the filmmakers are trying to accomplish, and we're all invested. And then it's sort of what's been great, to your point about the set thing, is that like once the doors open and the crew's walking in, we're a team. Like we'll sort of hash it out up to that moment, and then you clip your tool belt on and you go to work, and then we'll keep hashing it out. And that passion it doesn't stop. Everybody is driven to keep pushing the ball up the hill, keep making this thing better. Listening to the client feedback when they're, they might just offhandedly go like, this thing should work like that, and then that will be floating around in the back of your head, and you're like, should it? And caring about that, listening and when that's right, working toward that goal of like, how do we make the tool do the thing the intuitive way and all that stuff.
On Mando season 1, Greg was like, "Okay, can you take the ceiling down a stop and take that fill and bring that up a stop, please?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Okay, here we go. Boop, boop, boop." And he saw me do it, and he kind of looked, and he's like, "That thing doesn't work in stops, does it?" and I was like, "No." And he's like, "You're just guessing, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." Now I kind of knew the math. Right, I knew the math a little bit, but photographic stops aren't, it's sort of a kooky scale, and I kind of knew, but it was not. And now our tools work in stops.
Now it works in stops.
Yeah, I mean, one of the early ones was the first DPs who walked in were like, "Okay, I just put something like a sticker on the wall," and we were like, that's not how it works in 3D. That's not how CG works. And then we had to go back to our R&D team, and we're like, it needs to just be a sticker. And they were like, that's not how CG works. And we were like, I know it needs to be a sticker, though. And the great thing is people just being able to then go back and go, okay. And then people come back and say, I've got a solution for that sticker thing.
Right, because it is interesting. People, filmmakers think of it like a big translate. They think of it like a big picture. And no matter of you going, "No, dude, it's a portal to a world." And like you can see, and this works in 3D space. And they're like, "I don't care, man, put that there." And then you do it, but you're navigating in a 3D space, so you're taking an object and translating it along XYZ coordinates as you're sort of grabbing it and moving it. But in a 2D world on a plane, it looks like you're going. And they think you don't know what you're doing, and they are like, no, just put that there, and it's like on a ceiling, so it does this, right? So we actually, as much as it enraged our engineering team, we actually did a lot of very complicated math work to make 3D things present in a two-dimensional way in different render passes. So they did actually exist in a 2D coordinate structure. So literally, a DP could say, take this and put it there, as if it was a physical light in a thing and not a light that's existing in a 3D space. Mostly from a usability perspective, and so people, it would just be more intuitive as a use case for people. But you know, to them, they just see it differently than someone who's coming from a computer graphics background, who's so used to just sort of having a manipulator and throwing things around in Unreal or whatever. They just see it different.
And to your point before about the lighting thing, it's like it is a portal to another world. And then as it approaches the wall, it's a light. You know, like, and so it has to be both things to everybody, and yeah, and then once you get that down, they're like, it should stay square.
Like one of the things that comes up so often is it seems so silly, but with reflective floors or water, which we've done a few times with like water ponds or that kind of stuff, or even you know, they want to do open ocean, and we've worked on different ways, and we've kind of given the lanes, but right, they think it's going to look great, because it's reflective, and reflections and lighting are part of why we're here. The problem is if you try to extend water, and people can kind of get like, oh, if I'm trying to extend practical water into whatever water, the sort of frequency and amplitude of practical water into that is going to be tricky, and how do we extend the dynamism? Are we doing a water sim? Are we doing photography of water? It's a whole thing. But actually what ends up really hurting you is that you're reflecting water on water. You're not reflecting the world. Right, so if the more water goes up the wall, you get a double horizon, because it's getting a reflection of itself. Or if you've got like if you just got like a desert, and the desert continues up the wall, and it's like yellow or whatever, you're getting yellow dirt on the wall that is then lighting your dirt yellow, and now it just no longer matches. So we've learned, for instance, work with the art department. So we were once doing a very sort of red Utah type of desert, and we worked with the art department to get some of their dirt samples, you know, a couple weeks before they were going to put them out. And when we did that, and we literally like scanned the dirt, made the extension out of it, put it on. I mean, it couldn't be more the same until you turn it on. And now the world is too red, because you're lighting it with a copy of itself, in addition to the blue sky, which in the world you would only be really getting the blue sky. So we learned to actually go with a grayer dirt, which then we could color correct the world redder, which would light it. It's like throwing a baseball pitch, right? Here's our strike zone, and here's how you want it to look, but we're going to go a little grayer. We're going to throw the ball here, and then using color correction, curve it back to where you want it by reddening up the world, which is going to light the grayer dirt, which is going to make it red, which is going to make it blend.
And that extends to all things. We had a red alien come in, and they brought him in, and it's like, look cool. Walk into the volume, and it was a red room. And then they were like, and they ran him out of there, and then came back, and he had been repainted. And so then outside of the room, he looked bizarre. And then in the room looked the perfect color. And I feel like that thing, it extends to all things, right? It's like, this is producing light, and so the relationship between our team and the set painters, our team and set decorators, our team and the costumers and the makeup artists, we're a venue and a team, and so yeah, it extends to all that.
It's always light. I got one more story. I know you want to get another thing, but I just love this one so much. It's always light that messes you up. Why does it not match? And once we had a scene with a few characters on sort of a balcony, and it wasn't established in the edit that you didn't see that there was an overhang over them, but it was in the scene, and they looked flat. It looked sort of portrait studio, and they looked flat. And everybody's, God, they just don't, I don't believe it. It didn't look right. And we burned a lot of calories going like, okay, well, we're going to try to light them here. We had more CG lights, we had more practical lights. We were trying to light them to match this sort of blue cloudless sky back there to get it to look right. And it just did not look right at all. And this is why supervisors are supervisors. The VFX suit came by and just went, hold on a second. And he went away for 5 minutes, and he grabbed, out of our library, he just grabbed a cloud, picture of a cloud, just a tiny little cloud, and put it into the content in the distance. And the lighting on the people didn't change at all. But you bought it because you went, oh, there's a cloud out there. There must be another cloud above. And now that's why they're sort of flat and shadowy, and so let's move on. And it's that kind of in the moment fun problem solving of like, how do we make this look right now? Like I've got 2 minutes to make this look right or we're screwed, is the part that's the most sort of contagious and fun about it.
Well, I've got one more quick question before we go. This is to sort of leave people thinking in terms of what lessons has ILM learned from incorporating virtual production that could potentially be applied to other industries or other forms of entertainment?
I think, at least to my mind, the fact is that the technology is one thing to solve, but the scaling and the people is in some ways the more pivotal one. We just moving into the space of, and our team has gotten really fluent now that we'll come in and we'll say like, this is the problem with the production, and then people will say like, but the technology doesn't work that way, just tell them no, and now I can just say, no's not the answer for this question. Like, yes is the answer, how do we get there? But that's the biggest thing is the technology is one piece, but understanding how to work with the people, having the right people on your team is what lets you scale and lets people have good experiences.
Yeah, I feel like it's the way that these things, these disruptions tend to feel like, well, this is how we're gonna do everything now. Or like, the way we're gonna do everything is different. And inevitably, no, it's just a great new tool that's gonna settle down and be a part of things. It's like in 1982 or whatever, whenever MIDI encoding kind of came out and synthesizers and keyboards sort of became everywhere, and music got real weird for like 2 or 3 years, and suddenly every song was keyboards. And it's like, no, every song's not gonna have to have keyboards in it. And just like, this is just gonna become part of the band. That it's not gonna be an exotic other thing, virtual production. It's just gonna be sort of a tool that people take for granted and is gonna integrate things. And I feel like that cycle of disruption and integration applies to a lot of things.
I think that's a good spot to end, everybody. So, round of applause for ILM.
Thank you, guys.
Justin, Chris, Ian, thank you all so much.